Hello, and thank you for joining us for this latest edition of StrategEast Live, a discussion on remote education in the wake of a pandemic. I'm Horton Beebe-Center. I'm a member of the advisory board of StrategEast and a consultant to the Center for Transformative Teaching and Learning at St. Andrew's Episcopal School in Potomac, Maryland, where we design and operate online programs aimed at enhancing the capabilities and effectiveness of secondary school teachers, whether they're in a classroom or on a screen, and improving the education of students around the world. Our topic today is remote education in the wake of a pandemic. As we all know, these past few months, the world has embarked on an unscheduled crash course in remote education and distance learning. In almost every country around the globe, schools, universities, government offices, businesses, stores and restaurants have closed and everyone went home. With little preparation and practically overnight, entire institutions, indeed entire economic sectors, have had to shift to online operations. Now, many people, including, I assume, most of the folks with us today, had a head start in that they already led highly digitized professional lives. But many others, including me, had to learn very quickly how to remain productive in the absence of in-person interactions. And we became far more conversant with Zoom and other virtual convening platforms than we ever thought we would. Some of us, not me, even learned high video production values in dressing the backgrounds captured by our computer cameras or inserting ourselves into dramatic scenes. Just last week, one colleague of mine appeared to be joining a meeting I was in from a perch in the Marin Highlands, high above the Golden Gate Bridge. We've all had glimpses into this unforeseen global experiment, whether you operate a business, advise an industry, run training programs, or teach school. Here's one example. My daughter is in 9th grade in Virginia, and I observed how her public high school worked bravely to keep courses and homework and tests moving forward, and struggled mightily to maintain some sense of cohesion among 1,200 high school students. Time will tell how the school fared in serving its students academically. But it was very clear that the move to online classes revealed and amplified the digital divide among young people in this mid-sized city in Central Virginia, where some students simply had no existing access to the internet. And as for the social and emotional growth kids experience at school, the nourishment of daily in-person connection, the loss is already evident. So this is what we want to explore today, the opportunities and productive challenges of remote education. How can online engagement open new channels for connection and learning and embrace geographies and people in ways that are simply not practical, maybe even impossible, with in-person engagement? What are the limitations of the virtual medium, the digital platforms on which we're convening? How does the transition to the internet exacerbate the digital divide and achievement gaps that already exist? And how might we address those? In short, what is the impact and how can we best respond to this unforeseen global experiment in which we are all participating? We are very fortunate to have a distinguished panel with us today for the discussion. Nicola Doherty is with LinkedIn Learning, where she is the head of higher education business for Europe, Middle East, Africa, and Latin America. Nicola has worked in e-learning for the past 6 years. Irakli Kashabadze is the founder and CEO of Future Laboratory, which offers innovation solutions for project-based and STEAM education. Irakli previously served as a senior official in Georgia's Ministry of Economy and Sustainable Development and was the founding director of Georgia's Innovation and Technology Agency. And Vadim Zelenkov is Director of Training and Development at EPAM Systems. EPAM is a leading global product development, digital platform engineering, and digital product design company, and a close partner of StrategEast. For those of you live streaming on the Facebook page, there's a comment section where you can add and address questions for our speakers. To start our conversation, I'd like to ask our panelists to think of something they've experienced or observed in their professional lives since the coronavirus crisis began. Something in the realm of remote education, if possible, but not necessarily, that never would have happened before everything changed. Who wants to take the first crack at it? Vadim, would you?
Yeah, hello, my friends. Actually, I was surprised by the fact that here in Belarus, we didn't have lockdown due to coronavirus. And at the same time, children were left at home for a couple of weeks, not just to play, but to continue learning. And I have to say that it was the greatest challenge to our system of education, and apparently we were not ready. And one of the results of this situation is that at the level of Ministry of Education, a tender was announced to develop a learning platform for schools. And I think it is one of the positive outcomes of this situation. Of course, coronavirus affected a lot of us, I mean, at the level of families, children, students, and even at our company level. One of our biggest challenge was to transition quickly into e-learning. And we did so. We hoped that self-study is an answer to this challenge. But we also noticed that all our trainers should be engaged into learning process itself, because actually they are center of this process and can't be substituted even by good content. Our biggest challenge is to keep this educational process still effective for our employees. Thousands of our employees are engaged into internal trainings, and self-study materials are not enough to achieve learning goals and career challenges of our employees. So we experimenting now with mixture of online sessions, with experiential sessions, with live one-on-one asynchronous communication with our mentors. So we are still on our way to find the most effective approach, how to organize education in our company in a most effective way. And I think it pushes us to find a good solution. Actually, we are still developing our learning platform and working on better content, better structuring of training materials. So I think those are positive outcomes of these situations, this coronavirus.
Vadim, thank you very much. Your initial point about the remarkably different response by the government of Belarus to the coronavirus crisis in comparison to other governments is a very important one. And we should come back to that. The diversity of responses at the government level can have a tremendous impact on what the possibilities are, what the opportunities are for making the best of the online platform. And so I'd like to return to that, and thank you also for your insights on how how EPAM is experimenting with blended learning and synchronous, asynchronous, different models for continuing the work you do. Let's go to Nicola, if you have some observation.
I think in terms of the in the initial, I suppose for context, I'm in Ireland at the moment, and so we're in about week 12 of our lockdown here, and so my client base, my teams, what we would do is we would work with universities and further education organizations across all of Europe, Middle East and Africa, and also South America. And so having exposure to multiple markets around the world, you see how different countries respond in different ways. And what has been, I think, a really fantastic inadvertent element of the fact that it is a global pandemic is that there has been this universal, we're in it together, and it's really galvanized people around the world in trying to solve this problem or respond to the problem in a uniform way. I think part of the byproducts of that has been, I think, how institutions have been managing the change management of moving into a digital environment rather than face-to-face for both their students and their staff. It is a significant change, and even for a company like LinkedIn, where for me, I am able to do my job as effectively at home or in the office, although there's a lot of disadvantages to the current state in terms of how I can work. But we were still very kind of, I suppose, ahead of the times digitally. But even we found there was significant pain points in moving our organization to a fully work from home or digital setup. And so for universities and schools and other education institutions that have not been working in this way, the change has been just tremendous. And what I've seen from speaking with others within the segment is this real pulling together both of the staff and the students. Students have been phenomenal in managing their expectations in terms of what, that was very much, let's just get through the rest of this academic year while we're going through this crisis. And for academics, where in the past they may have had challenges in creating these digital transformation projects, they have weighed in behind, let's make sure that we're supporting the students and giving them the best education possible in this quite quick time frame. And I think that that's just been incredibly impressive, and one of the things that stands out for me.
Thank you, Nicola. And yes, despite the varying responses we've had from governments, institutions, individuals, I agree with you. From my experience, I am witnessing a heightened collective cohesion. We're all in this together, as it has been a sort of motto. And we do see, I would say, social, across a broad social spectrum, people who are responding far better to the crisis than we might have expected. And in that connection, I'd like to come back later in our conversation to how do the individual responses to the coronavirus crisis, how do they compare and interact with, say, the official and the government responses, diverse as they are? Irakli, would you like to add anything?
Yeah. First of all, thank you very much for inviting me. It's a great honor to me to take part in this seminar online event. What I can say that we see that a lot of people and a lot of companies are in trouble now. And during this COVID-19, someone changed the sphere of work, sphere of activities. Someone has the problems to, first of all, change the mentality, change the approach, and make a transformation in themselves. Because the biggest challenges for the companies is not during the digital transformation, is not the technological transformation, it's people's transformation. And that's why our project Go and Grow, which was initiated by our company, becoming very actual, because Go and Grow is oriented on soft skills development of the people. We all need to understand that the people's brain is neuroplastic, and you can achieve any kind of that. There was a myth that you can't develop creativity, or you can't develop some kind of critical thinking on emotional intelligence. Yeah, it's not true. It's possible, but you need a lot of training. You need a lot of exercise, and that's why we have approach like the new starting. Using our system is more like a gym. You need daily work to improve your adaptability, creativity, and other soft skills. And how is connected to the nowadays? Again, someone has better adaptability, someone not, and that's why they're becoming. They have more problems. They could find some ways to how to transform existing processes in their companies and in their life. The same situation, I think, is in all countries, not only in Georgia. It's the same situation in developing and in developed countries, because unfortunately schools are still teaching kids like they taught 100 years ago. They are not connecting the teaching process to the real life. They don't understood, most of schools directors and teachers, that if you need to develop skills, you can develop it by lecture, theoretical lecture. It's like you can't teach people swimming theoretically or driving the car. And that's why we need to transform, first of all, the methods of education in the schools, in universities. And for more older population, of course, they also could change and upgrade their soft skills, because neuroplasticity of the brain, it's in all age. You can develop your own capabilities in all ages. Yeah, it's my opinion that then you're sitting in a class, you're always sitting in the same room. You're not connected to the real world. You are making the tasks, and yeah. Well, we are. There might be the same problems in the future. There might be COVID-23. There might be other such kind of crises in the world, and that's why government of the different countries, schools, need to totally change their strategies towards education. Also, companies' strategies and HR policies have to be changed. They need to more train to their staff to become more creative, more adaptable to the new changes. Because in other cases, they will have a lot of problems and losses in the future.
Irakli, thank you very much for that. And thank all of you, Vadim, Nicola, Irakli. In all that you've said, you've all touched on a few crucial points. The accelerated learning and adaptation we've had to do to respond to the challenges that the coronavirus crisis have presented us. Irakli, your point, one of your points was that in many ways, people exceeded their own expectations of what they were capable of. Nicola, Vadim, you were talking about the value and the importance of testing out new approaches, being creative, and the value of what you might call, say, blended model of engagement, where there's some synchronous, some asynchronous, some live, and some initiatives that or engagements that find people where they are rather than in the same place at the same time. So let's look at this from a broader perspective, and if we can, bring some examples of what's going on in the Eurasia region. So this accelerated learning that you guys have just described, that comes in the context, even before the pandemic, whereby economic forecasters and policymakers were telling us that we are right now, find ourselves in a massive realignment of our economies due to the digital revolution. I heard recently that one prediction is that 85% of the jobs that will exist in 10 years from now haven't been invented yet. So here we are in the middle of this accelerated learning experience. What insights can you share with us on how we can adapt and apply remote education to productively guide this longer range realignment in which we find ourselves? And as I said, if you have examples from, say, the Eurasia region or elsewhere, because I know that you all have broad geographical reach, that may address this broader realignment. So who'd like to jump in?
Okay, maybe I will start.
Thank you, Irakli.
Thank you very much for a very interesting question. I think first of all, we need to better understand how the people learn. We need to know more that what kind of role is during the teaching process is the mental model of the people means. Because the mental model is a very interesting issue and very interesting part of person, because it's like decoding element. Then you are providing some kind of information to any kind of person or kids. All of the people are understanding the information by their mental model. They're decoding information by their mental model. What does it mean, this mental model? Maybe someone don't know that. It's what we like, what kind of previous information we have, and many other structured information, feelings, or understanding what we generated during our life. And we have our own view to the world. That's why then we are teaching kids and they didn't understood. It doesn't mean that they have a problem with understanding. It means that they have different mental model, and you need to construct this knowledge from the point that then they are. That's why personalized learning is becoming more important. That's why it's important to better understood at what level is the kids and any kind, the person on any age, and start from this point. That's why I think in the future the massive education will be not so efficient. I mean, in the case of constructing of knowledge, because we need different approaches during the process. At the same time, you can't. We see a lot of lectures and coaching sessions in emotional intelligence and etc. But again, you can't teach people soft skills by lecture. Yeah, it's good that you are getting this information, but again, you need a lot of training to grow your synapses, neurons in your brain, and to get appropriate habits of minds. Also, the knowledge is not connected to the real world. It's not structured. And again, we need more applied knowledge. We need to give to the people more structured knowledge, which they can use or better understood these metacognition elements.
Correctly. Thanks very much for that.
Thank you.
Your mention of soft skills brings to mind that we really are. Our soft skills are being tested to their limits as we've gone through this rapid transition. And also your point about the mental model that everyone's brain is coded differently is something that resonates with the work that I'm doing now with the Center for Transformative Teaching and Learning. There at this center, the core mission is to take all of the research that has been done over recent years about how in the sphere of mind-brain education science, and translate it into tools that can be practically applied by teachers, whether they're in classrooms or in an online environment, and also be absorbed by students so that they understand that we all learn differently, that there are optimal ways to connect with, make connections between teachers and students that are not necessarily the traditional ways that we all grew up with, at 7:30 in the morning till 3:30 in the afternoon. So this digital revolution is compelling us to take a look at what you've just highlighted for us, Irakli, how individual brain coding can be understood, and that the teaching practices, training practices can be optimized for each person. Now, speaking of the digital revolution, Vadim Ipem is right there on the forefront. And so would you like to respond either to my earlier question or anything you heard Irakli say?
Actually, first of all, I totally agree with Irakli, and I consider that the most important soft skill that we should teach and train our students is ability to learn effectively. We should prepare our students for lifelong learning. And I totally agree with you that it is useless to ask our children about future professions, because these professions are not existing yet. And from that point of view, we should prepare our students to be open, to be flexible, and to train them how to learn effectively. And it is actually what we do. Speaking of examples, it's maybe not a secret that we, together with StrategEast organization, we started experimental project in Georgia. What we are trying to do is to give opportunity to talented people to transition into a new digital career. So we take people with no literacy or relevant background in information technologies, and trying to help them to make the very first step to a new career. It's quite a challenging thing, and due to pandemic situation, we totally changed our plans and ways we deliver this training. We hoped to come to Georgia and make this training more traditional in good IT hub, in classroom. But now we are working with students remotely, individually. And actually, LinkedIn is helping us greatly, because we rely on the content they provide and mix these perfect lectures with our practical tasks, experiential sessions with students. And again, we are improving our platform. A lot of things should be done actually to assure good learning experience. And I think we should cope with the situation of lack of social interaction between students and teachers and mentors and themselves. So I believe we can't substitute live communication with technology, even with artificial intelligence. So technology is just a platform, but still we need a lot of human effort to make education effective.
Thanks very much, Vadim. I take your point that there is no substitution to in-person engagement, human contact. And if we are to help the new generation become what you call lifelong learners, we have to find the proper balance between the most optimal application of these technologies and that irreplaceable human element. And it's been tough when folks are sitting at home, but what you've said about the StrategEast EPAM initiative with the IT Hub in Georgia is an example of how an organization has been able to be nimble and to shift and make the most of what otherwise first presented itself as a deep challenge. Nicola, let's go to you because Vadim mentioned that that LinkedIn Learning is providing some important ingredient to the work that's going on out of the IT Hub, but also because LinkedIn is, you were conceived in the digital universe. You were conceived as a way of linking people, of finding those new jobs that don't exist yet. So what's your response to what either the question or what Vadim and Irakli have said? Nicola?
Absolutely. I think there's so much that you could add. I'm trying to prioritize what, otherwise I could go on and on and on. It's phenomenal that, LinkedIn.com was conceived as a place where professionals could keep connected to their network and expand that in a digital way. And what's interesting over the last 15 years is that, LinkedIn has actually become this giant professional community that stretches out around the world, where rather than just being a hub where they can stay connected, people are coming to learn, to share, not just from each other, but also on LinkedIn Learning itself. And so, I think that the evolution of that change came as a result of a change in behavior of how people learn, how we are looking even in digital ways to make those connections. And I think there's a lot of learnings that we can apply to the COVID situation, even based on what those changes have been over time. I think one of the biggest impacts of the pandemic, and it's really an accelerant on what we've been seeing economically anyway, as we've seen an awful lot of countries starting to go into recession even before the pandemic came in, is there is this big change in the workplace and in the world of work at the moment. And what we're seeing, really where that change is coming from is the pace of technology innovation. We're basing an awful lot of our structures, our social structures, like schools, universities, higher education institutions, public policy, on our human memories of what learning was like for us, or how our careers were formed and created. And the pace of change back then, even for me in my mid-30s, is so much faster than what it was then. And our institutions and our structures just haven't kept pace with that. And I think what we're seeing is that, and this is why Vadim and Irakli were focusing very much on soft skills, as I believe that you are as well, Horton, is that it's these soft skills, these foundational skills, that will allow people to transition, as technologies that they may be experts in become obsolete, and they move, leveraging the skills that they have into something that's transferable and applicable to that skill set. But if you don't have those soft skills, the ability to communicate, to be resilient, to transition and manage change, then you are not going to be able to make that transition, and you'll get stuck. And I think that to Vadim's point, you know, the ability to learn, you know, even unlearn, relearn yourself over time, that is going to be the most important thing that anybody's going to be able to do. And while there's so much benefit in being face to face, I think that blending technology into the that they have and into the education space will pay incredible dividends, not just on those soft skills, but the hard skills that they have as well. The point that I would make to it is that because of the pandemic, there has been a massive acceleration in these institutions and in public policy in terms of the strategy. It went from a 10-year plan to a 1 or 2 month plan on how do we get everybody online. And I think that a very simple trap to fall into is that, because there's so much to consider, is we take the easy road, which is we replicate what we had done face to face, and we put that onto Zoom, or we put that onto another platform, and we keep going as business as usual. But I truly believe, because even before coming to LinkedIn, my role with universities in Australia was putting their on-campus programs online, and there are so much dividends for the institution and the students to put it into a digital format, but only if it is designed for that format and not designed for face-to-face, but delivered in a different universe. And I think it takes time to triage the, you know, design for what we need right now with the resources we have right now. But I do believe they need to be thinking long term, you know, what does it need to look like? I continue to you know, the best student outcome and experience in the journey as well. And it sounds, from the sounds of things, like what Vadim and the team at EPAM are doing it sounds like that's exactly what they're doing, which is great.
Thanks very much, Nicola. As you say, the crisis, the public health crisis, has been an economic accelerant of a trend that had already started. And you pointed out that that as a result of that and the digital revolution, that the pace of change has considerably accelerated as well. So these are all baseline conditions that we are more or less aware of, and as you say, institutionally and individually, some are responding better to those conditions than others. What I'd like to ask Irakli now, since his business is the future, how can we thoughtfully take into account these what Nicola so well articulated as these underlying conditions, and apply them in ways that will lead to more likely to better outcomes rather than say exacerbating existing economic divides, achievement gaps that are naturally part of the mosaic of individuals' experiences in different parts of the world. So can you address, Irakli, how, or articulate, how can we emphasize those soft skills that you referred to earlier and that Nicola just mentioned in ways that will bring us more likely to positive outcomes in what we all seem to agree will be a blended embrace of in-person and online experiences?
Yeah. Thank you very much for the question. And what we are trying to do, we are growing our startup because our new platform, Go and Grow, it's a startup. We are testing a lot of models, business models, what people like, what people didn't like. The main challenges is that, unfortunately, still people didn't understood the importance of soft skills and how they should grow soft skills. That's why our products for kids became more popular, and we tested with parents. We got very, very positive feedback from them, and a lot of registered users. The parents are getting, we are using micro-learning system based on our platform. The kids are getting 2 exercises per day for critical thinking development. And we all know that critical thinking is a very important part and very important life skills for 21st century, because people should have ability to analyze information. They should make the right decisions. They should see the patterns, and the critical thinking is helping how to plan in the time management, in a lot of things. And our main mission is to make soft skills development process more accessible to the all people in the world. And this project starting from Georgia, and we would like to become the global platform. We'd like to help a lot of people, not only by electronic tools, but we believe that physical interaction will become still so like we had several months ago. And we have both tools like online and offline processes during the group teaching and group interactions. But again, we should think more about our own flexibility. We should think more about our growth mindset. We should be more resilient to the failures, but again, we need to exercise in this point currently by ourselves, but very soon by our platform, and we believe that we will change a lot of things and help a lot of people during such kind of crises and during such kind of problems in their businesses or in life. One short point which I would like to mention is that performance of the employees are directly connected to the soft skills, because the level of creativity, the level of the critical thinking, and like Nicole mentioned and Vadim mentioned, you need to communicate with your team. You need to know how to collaborate. You need to how to make joint decisions, how to plan jointly, how to invent new solutions and things, and transform your business very quickly. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Irakli. And that what you bring up, your emphasis on soft skills and the necessity to be flexible, creative, I think brings us to a paradox, which is that it's my assumption, and this may or may not be correct, that soft skills are largely acquired through human interaction, where maybe we're endowed with many of them at birth. In other cases, it's through active socialization and new experience and exposure. So I imagine we all have agreed that there are certain things that don't necessarily translate through a digital screen, and certain things that are harder to communicate. And I imagine the acquisition or enhancement of soft skills would be one of the hardest things to try to acquire and to transfer through a screen. With that in mind, and in particular thinking of flexibility, I want to come back to Vadim with any response or any comment you have, but also to, if you can, return to your initial comment, which is you did mention that the Belarus governmental response to the coronavirus crisis was quite different from that of other countries. Also, Sweden and a number of other places have been pioneering different approaches to this. But at the same time, you said the Ministry of Education did accelerate its engagement of online learning and platforms. So, so please feel free to react to what Nicola and Irakli have said, but if you can, come back to how has the Belarus government demonstrated some flexibility in responding to an unprecedented challenge? Thanks.
Thank you. So getting back to the question of soft skills, yeah, I agree with you that soft skills are very hard to develop, and it requires a lot of time to develop a certain soft skill. The distance learning itself, it's maybe not a good option for students who keep procrastinating things or aren't able to stick to deadlines. So distance learning requires self-motivation, persistency, and getting back to our experience at EPAM, even in Georgia, unfortunately, we don't have luxury of time. That is why we decided to select people with appropriate soft skills to participate in our program. So we organized a very complicated engagement campaign and interviewed each and every candidate to understand motivation, affordability of time, and so on and so forth. And the selection was very rigorous, and from hundreds of candidates we selected 37, and I understand that it's not the answer which can be reproduced massively, yes, but again, it is our approach, because within limited time and budget, we have to train those students and assure they get new job and new career after training. If we speak about response of our government to coronavirus, maybe I'm not the best person to comment, and again, it's subject of dispute, but positive outcome, at least one of them, we had choices here. So for example, parents who didn't have opportunity to keep the children at home being busy, they could attend, could send children at school. At the same time, those who wanted to stay at home to be safe also had this opportunity. And the biggest challenge for teachers was to combine classroom training with online, because frankly speaking, not all schools have good equipment to assure remote classroom experience. But at the same time, we noticed that a lot of teachers were open and communicated with children with video conferencing tools. They were ready to work and dedicate extra hours to students who learn remotely, to children who work and learn remotely from home. So I think we have this flexibility. On the other hand, the very important point here is that the infrastructure should also support blended learning, and unfortunately we don't have it here in Belarus, and it should be developed. Who knows, maybe within the next few months we will find that these products and these platforms will be developed internally here, or maybe we can use existing solutions. I don't know. frankly speaking. We expressed our interest as company, as a software engineering company, to participate in this tender. And we hope that our experience also will be useful, because from year to year we train thousands of students in more than 35 countries. So, and we have experience of delivering trainings online, in blended model, or even in classroom, and we have our own infrastructure to support all these initiatives. And as Nicola said, lockdown only accelerated development of our internal tools and platforms. And we hope we can also contribute and help our government to be more flexible and to deliver training in different formats for those children who can't participate in classroom trainings, and maybe even for those with disabilities who can't attend school in a regular basis.
Yeah, and indeed, one thing that the coronavirus crisis has brought home is that not having internet access is a disability.
Yeah,
it is.
true.
It segments the society in ways that may have been understood before, but are now far more widely evident than they were before. Your description, Vadim, of the Belarus experience is very interesting. As you said, the students were given the option, parents were given the option to send kids or not. What was the result? The teachers had to work a double time to make sure that this blended learning, as relates to different cohorts within a single class, had to be handled. And that's been the case. I mentioned Virginia at the outset. The high school teachers, I've observed them working double and triple time in order to reach all of their students. And my hat is off to students and teachers everywhere who have met the needs of their students by absorbing the impact of this crisis. So back to, we have a little less than 10 minutes left, and I want to touch on the remote education and economic opportunity that Vadim, you were referring to earlier, and the broader, the broader issue of whether we're talking about soft skills, whether we're talking about digital literacy, whether we're talking about simply internet access. This move to online education is clearly widening the opportunity gap for those without access or without those particular skills. And so, Nicola, can you make any observation on how we can apply new technologies in ways that specifically address these problems, specifically either address the problems or reduce the exacerbation of that divide that is occurring because of the nature of the platforms?
Absolutely. And I think this is a point that's particularly close to my heart. I think we're seeing increasingly, over the last couple of weeks as COVID, multiple countries are reporting studies where inequality gaps are widening between students in both, primary, secondary, and also tertiary education, where you're taking into account the nearly every spectrum of it. Do they have a room that's quiet that they can study? Is there technology that they have access to? Do they have the broadband then that connects it? Before you even start talking about additional programs that are value adds to help them bridge those skill gaps. There's a lot of basics there that need to be taken into consideration by governments around the world. And one of the things that kind of to draw on what I said before, to make a valuable and effective education online, it requires relatively significant investment, and from the institutions themselves and by governments around the world, because to deliver you can deliver a program online. You can get a Zoom subscription and you can try and do your lecture for an hour and try and lead a bit of a discussion session, but is it going to be as impactful as it could be? The answer to that would be no, unless you start using specialized infrastructure and resources to support and drive those learning outcomes that we need for our students, and also for the staff supporting them. You shouldn't have situations in the long term where teachers are working tons of hours overtime to support, because of the efficacy of the student and because they want to make sure the student has the right outcome. They need to be supported in that. And I think there's an awful lot of things that institutions and public policymakers around the world could consider. When you're dealing with technology vendors, this might be the place where you need to have centralized decision making rather than decentralized at an institutional level. Use the power of the group rather than the individuals, because what we're also going to see is an inequality between the schools and universities that have the ability to spend and the budgets that can pivot quickly, versus the institutions that just will not have that budget at hand. And a way to help there is by consolidating your procurement power and purchasing as a block rather than necessarily as individuals, and for governments to identify what is key infrastructure that they need to have, and also look at what their investment levels are into the space. We're talking about a situation where all of a sudden universities across and schools, secondary, primary schools around the world, are essentially doing the equivalent of extending their physical infrastructure. These are priority and core investments that they need to make, and they can't just kind of make it out of thin air. And I think that governments around the world have to keep pace with that, because I think what we're going to see is, we've seen in news articles all around the world, over the last number of years, is that gap between the people who have and the people that don't is only getting wider. And I think this is going to create a chasm if we don't take the right steps to bridge it. And I think there's a lot of practical things that we can do, either as private companies, as public policymakers, or by the educational decision makers themselves. But I'll probably stop there, otherwise I could keep going all evening.
No, we'd be happy to hear you. Unfortunately, our time is coming to an end, and Nicola, I think you touched on a number of points that I think we can consider conclusive for this discussion. All of you, Vadim, Irakli, and Nicola, you've all talked about your individual response to the pandemic, to the flexibility, the adaptability, the impetus to push your companies, yourselves, and the pleasant surprise, as Irakli mentioned, that he observed with how people exceeded their own expectations of how they could adapt. Nicola, you've, in your final comments there, put the onus directly on larger institutions and governments to help to focus and harness and to direct in a productive way individual energy and flexibility. So we have the capability of responding to the crisis and to the digital revolution in ways that reduce differences in our societies. How can the larger institutions and our governments do the best to optimize those individual energies and make for a collective benefit? Our time is up. Vadim, Nicola, Irakli, thank you very much. I'd like to also thank our producer, Ksenia, who has been monitoring the wires for us and making this possible, and to all of the organizations that you represent, LinkedIn, EPAM, and the future forum from Irakli. StrategEast thanks you, I thank you, and that concludes our segment.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Wish you everything best.
Okay, bye-bye all.